So these are the new French doors, and above it I'm going to have to now install a steel that spans the whole of this. I thought I was going to get away with a lintel, but the fact that I'm going to have a beam going across to the other side of the room, this is going to be the sort of height of the mezzanine, and it's going to be loading onto that beam. A lintel like this is, I've been told, is simply not strong enough. Either side of the opening, I'm going to have to create a pad for the beam, the steel beam, to rest on, and spread the load down this wall. So building control have said that the easiest way of doing this is simply by creating a form, concrete form like this one here, to the height of the beam, and then filling that with concrete, strengthening up the wall. Then the beam will simply sit on top of that. The only other thing I've got to consider here is obviously the height of the beam. This is the start of the beam and it's 178 high. Then it's going to take it up to about here. The actual beam itself is going to sit similar to where the lintel is, so I'm not too worried about the positioning of the beam with regards to the rafters. I am, however, just looking now at where that is in comparison to the door. So if the beam comes down to here, then obviously we're then going to have a plasterboard, hopefully some insulation on the beam to prevent a cold spot, and then some plasterboard underneath. So I need to make sure that wherever that line is, there's enough space there to put insulation and plasterboard, or maybe just an insulated plasterboard is the way to go. But yeah, that's what I'm doing now. So this is the right-hand side as you look out of the door, and as you can see, I've had to rebuild. There's a big hole here, so I've rebuilt that with some oddly shaped rocks, and I'm just building up the form now to tip the concrete in. And then the other side, I've had to take down some bricks there. So we've got a nice little cavity there that I'm just going to fill with concrete, and then the beam, the steel beam, will sit on top of that, spanning the whole width. Here's a top tip when creating forms. So I've got some pesky gaps just down there, and I put a couple of bits of wood there to to fill the space. But those smaller ones there, I could be here all day filling them. So instead of doing that, I'm going to use some expanding foam. Let it dry and then fill it with concrete the next day. Happy days. So I finally finished making the forms for either side of the door there. So they're going to be for the padstones, and as you can see inside, there's quite a big old cavity down there, and then it runs along. So that's going to be the height of the beam. It's the bottom edge of that. And then if we have a look at this side, I've gone belts and braces with the form, really strengthened it with things like that, just to stop it from, the concrete is obviously going to be heavy. The last thing I want is for it to spill out. And then just to be 100% sure on the form, there we go, nice and level. So the beam will sit nicely and level on top of the concrete once it's poured. Here we go, first bucket. Definitely going to use more than I thought. I used my mallet and hammer drill with the breaker attachment to vibrate the form, getting rid of any bubbles. So this is the top of the concrete, and as you can see, it's full to the top. All I'm doing now is just using this just to tamp off, get it nice and flat. Also got my little spirit level. Just make sure that that is nice and flat. So the beam sits on it nicely. Just skim a little bit off. Just throw that back. Smooth it off a bit. There we go, good to go. So I've filled the second padstone with concrete there. It's all nice and level. So it's just a case now of leaving them. I'm going to leave them for about 48 hours. Come back and then we can set the beam on top. So I've got my steel here for over the door opening. The reason I've had to go for a steel is I'm going to be loading it, so I'm going to be point loading it, i.e. the mezzanine is actually going to sit on top of this beam. So for that reason I couldn't have gone for a normal concrete lintel. So I've bought this steel. It's a 7 by 4 inch, and I've had it cut down to fit the aperture over there. So about 1.2 meters, I think it is. I've drilled these holes in at great expense to most of my drill bits are now completely blunt. I bought this one recently. It's a 12mm, and the idea being is that then I can put some bolts and bolt one of the joists for the mezzanine into the recess here, and then I can then use joist hangers to connect the mezzanine to this beam. So now it's a case of lifting it up onto the scaffolding, then placing it on top of the 2 pads, concrete pads that I've made either side of the door, and I'm going to set it into place, make sure it's nice and level, build up some bricks around it, and then I'll be ready to hang the joists on it, which is really exciting. So here's the joist in position. You can see the holes that I'm going to put there, connect the beam up to. So I'm just going to build up a little bed here for the beam to sit on. Make sure it's nice and level, and then build some bricks up around that to secure it in place. So I've marked out here on top of the padstone where the steel's going to go, and I've also drilled a hole here which lines up with the hole on the steel. And then when I offer it up, then I can at least know it's exactly in the same position. And I've done the same on the other side. And I'll probably replace that, just bang a screw in, just because I can. The beam is now set in place. I've pre-drilled it with several 12mm holes that I did on the ground. It's definitely the best idea to do because it does need quite a lot of pressure when drilling the steel. I've set it in on the padstones either side, and I'm just building up some bricks around it. But I'm actually going to have to set in one of the timbers before I do that, so then I can tighten them up, have the timber actually set inside the recess here, and then I'll be able to run joists across for the mezzanine above there. The other thing I've done there is I've just cut some timber sections, because obviously there isn't a lot of weight in this roof, but it still needs to be supported. So I've used the steel, and I've just run this bit of timber along and just cut some uprights just to support the roof in situ there. So here we've got the beam that's sitting inside the RSJ up there, and I've drilled a series of holes to put the bolts in, to put the threaded bar to secure it. But what I'm also doing is putting the hangers on. So these are the hangers that I'm using, and obviously they are too long, so we bend them over on the top like this. Because I'm using nails, pop them in using these Sherwood nails. I'm not going to be able to do this, and I'm not going to be able to bend them over and nail them in once this beam is bolted into the RSJ. So I'm doing that little bit of prep work now. I've got 2 beams to attach to this one. So I've just got 2 hangers, I'm just lining them up to ensure this one is at exactly the same height as this one. All I'm doing is I screwed a little bit of wood here to bring that level up to the same level as this one, pop the hanger on, and then nail it down.
Once I'd attached the joist hangers, I then bolted the joist to the steel using M12 threaded bar with square washers. Next, I attached the end beam to the dividing wall. I set a laser from the steel and then cut a joist to the correct length. I used some hydraulic props I'd bought from the middle aisle in Lidl to hold the joist in place, whilst I marked out where the holes were to be drilled.
So I'm just leveling up this beam that's going to be fixed there. These were actually in Lidl or Aldi in the middle aisle, about 16 quid each, and I think they're fixing for plasterboards, but they're absolutely fantastic for jobs like this where in theory I need another pair of hands, but just using these, you give it a little pump and it'll go up, and you can just get the finest of touches on it. Brilliant bit of kit.
I marked out where the holes in the joist were going to go, drilled and marked them onto the wall, then it was a case of drilling holes through the joist into the wall.
So I've got my bits of steel rod in with a washer and a nut on each. I need to make sure that once it goes in, because I've cut each one of these, that I can still get a nut on. So I always go for a dry run with this just to ensure that I can get all of the bolts in. I'm then going to take it down, clean out the holes, and then get the resin in and do one at a time.
It's really important to ensure there isn't any debris or dust inside the holes when using resin.
So I've cleaned out my holes and I've given them a hoover, and I've used the brush to get any dust out. I'm now going to use this resin. It's a raw plug bonded Anchor Archem 2. I've used this stuff before. It's pretty good. I'm going to put some in the hole, and then you've got about 2 minutes of workable time just to get it all set properly. I'm also, before I put any resin in, I'm going to line up and almost do like a dry run with the bolts just to make sure all of the bolts are in line and that I can put all of them through. The last thing I want to do is for this stuff to go off and then I can't get some of the bolts in. So here goes. So I've got my resin here. I'm going to poke it through into the concrete hole behind, and then it's sort of a bit of a guessing game, but a few squeezes. I can just see that squeezing out that side. Then I get my bolt. You haven't got a lot of time, so once it's in the hole there, give it a bit of a turn. This just helps the resin do its thing. I'm going to leave about that much to play with on the end. There we go, done. So I've started on this side of the mezzanine. This is going to be a supporting wall, so I need to make it out of 2x4s. And all I've done is created a basic frame. So this is going to be the length of the mezzanine here. And I've made it nice and straight. Then at the top there, I've got the continuation of the beam of the mezzanine, made sure it's nice and level. I've had to scribe a little bit out of this upright, but there's going to be another upright literally just there. So I'm not too worried about it compromising the strength of that one. So then next thing is to put in a few uprights and then put some noggins in. And then we've got our wall to then clamp down and screw in the beam up at the top there.
I then began putting some studs onto the wall. I used a laser measuring tool to get an accurate reading. This really sped things up and made things incredibly accurate.
So it's been a busy day making the mezzanine today, and here's what I've done. So we've already seen the beam that's in the steel beam here. So we've now got this wooden beam bolted to the wall. I've actually gone through to the other side with bolts. The resin was obviously not the best idea, so I've gone back to the bolts. So then I've built this stud wall here. So this is going to be a structural stud wall. You can see the underfloor heating manifold there. So it's built out of 2x4 timbers, and it's going to be clad in OSB to give it a structural element as well. And on top of that, we've now got another joist there that I've attached to the wooden frame. We've got the laser all the way around just to make sure it's all nice and level. So the next thing I'm going to do, which is really exciting, is putting on this front joist onto the end there, and then we'll get a really good sense of the space that we have underneath and the space that we have above the mezzanine itself. So here goes.
In this clip, I'm explaining how I installed the joists using the hangers. I drilled a piece of wood to the top of the main beam, which lines up the joist and ensures it is flush on the top. I secure this with a screw. I then pop a joist hanger around it, knock in the Sherrodized nails, then remove the block of wood on top.
So it's the morning after the day I started the mezzanine, and already things are really starting to take shape. So I've got two of these large beams in, and then obviously around the edge all of the beams. So it should be really quite quick now just to slot the beams in place on the hangers. So as we can see there, it's all bolted along. I actually changed my mind on the resin fix, and instead I've just gone straight through because I can access the other side and put a nut on the other end of the bolts. So they're all fixed in place. Then I've got my supporting stud wall here, so the 2x4s, and this will eventually be clad in OSB board as well to give it more of a structural element. Then I've gone straight across with this one. So this is the original steel that I put in a week or so ago, and I've bolted one of the joists to this, so then I can quickly and easily just put a couple of joist hangers on, and then I can span the whole room over to that side where this end one's actually just resting on the end of the supporting wall. Then I've got the next joist there. So I've been using this little Bosch measurer now. It's like a laser measurer. It's been really, really useful to get the exact measurements of the beam. Yes, you could use a tape measure, but this gives absolute millimeter detail, and then there are no questions asked. Just hold it up, put this up against there, fire off the laser, and it's so accurate. Really useful bit of kit. So one of the biggest challenges when doing framework like this with heavy timbers is simply just lifting things above your head. So I've come up with a little system, involves a couple of blocks of wood, very technical. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've marked out where my next joist is going to go. I'm going to drill this onto the top of the other beam, and that's going to mark how far up the joist needs to go. Then at the other side, I'm going to do exactly the same. So I've got my two pieces of wood on top. I'm now going to take an accurate measurement using the laser measurement between this beam and that beam. I'm going to then take my measurement from here, 3300, transfer it onto the tape, onto the beam, mark it up and cut it. Obviously this doesn't go full depth through, so I make an initial cut with a circular saw, get it nice and straight, and then finish it off with a hand saw. So I've cut my piece of timber, but I need to put this joist in, so I've got something to lift up against on one side of the structure. So I've got this offcut. I'm just going to offer it up to my piece of wood that I've drilled in the top. Make sure it's nice and level. I'm then going to place the hanger over and nail the hanger on. I'm obviously not going to put nails into the bottom of and into the timber itself, because once I've put this hanger in, I'm then going to take this offcut out and then use this to lift up the beam. So on one of the pieces of wood, I've got some screws in the top. So I've got an offcut, I'm going to offer it up, I've got my lines nice and square, and all I'm going to do is put a couple of screws in. So here's my little offcut that I've just screwed in, just 2 screws in the top. And this is obviously going to be the position of the final joist, but all I need it there for now is to give me some direction with this joist hanger. So I'm going to offer the joist hanger up, nail it on, obviously not putting any nails into this joist because I'm going to replace it in a second. So the next job is just to nail the hanger on. So I'm just removing the joist. Broken a drill bit. And now we've got the hanger ready to use to lift up the heavy joist. So I've got now my beam into the hanger that I've just previously installed. And I'm going to lift this end up, wedge it into place, and then I'm going to drive a screw down just to hold it there temporarily. So that's the previously installed hanger. Here's the beam I've just lifted up. And here's the block of wood to stop it from going higher than it needs to. And all I did then was lift it up, drive a screw into there. Nice tight fit. Now I can put the hanger on.
I then simply repeated this process for the other joists. Next came the floorboards. I opted for chipboard, tongue and groove because our plan is to carpet the mezzanine. I started by laying the boards on the joists to ensure they would cover the area.
So I'm up on the mezzanine and I've laid out the floorboards just to see exactly what cuts need to be made and also if I've got enough boards. So in this corner over here, the floorboards are going to butt up against the wall there, and as you can see it's quite uneven and there's a gap over there on my right hand side. So what I'm going to do is just scribe around that side there, then I'll fill that gap in with other board. Yeah, so that's the next job. So I picked up this scribing device on Amazon, about £6. So I'm going to give it a test. So it's just got a roll at one end and a spike at the other. And you just attach a little pencil in there. So I've just put some insulation in there just to pad it out. And I'm just going to roll it along the edge and see how accurate it is.
Once I'd finished scribing, I used the jigsaw to cut the profile.
Brilliant. So the scribe, real success. Nice and tight up against there. Lovely.
I then glued each board to the next one using a block of wood and hammer to ensure a tight fit. Before screwing each board down using 50mm screws into each joist at each edge of the board. Once each board was secured, I then ran the circular saw along the edge to cut the excess board, flush with the end joist.
So the mezzanine is now finished. You can just take a look up there. So I'll put the board on, cut the detail around the outside, a little bit of expanding foam, but yeah, really happy with it. And another job ticked.
If you've enjoyed this video, please like it and make sure you subscribe to the channel to get notified when the next video goes live. Thanks for watching.